highlighting the issues of mental health in our community. And Adam Dawson, as you might know, is the chair of Jami and a barrister. I knew Adam from the old days at UJS. Way back then, and then involved in London Jewish Forum, and has done great stuff in the Board of Deputies for our community. We're going to talk a little bit about these different kind of issues. So first of all, Adam, just tell us, how did you get involved in Jami? What's your story of how you became chair and your commitment to the organisation?
I wish I knew. I guess my story really started with I was invited to be a trustee of Jewish Care about 3 years ago. And that came, my late mother was in a Jewish care home for the last year of her life. And I was interacting and had always been sort of working and close with Jewish Care, who are partners with Jami. And through that, really, I was introduced to the work of Jami and to the work of mental health and the way in which that is a sort of specific strand of work which really permeates through the community, through the elderly community in terms of where Jewish Care serving and throughout, and got to know, like, and really respect the work that they were doing. And I suppose, sort of things all happen at the same time. I was involved with governor of one of the Jewish schools here, and that kind of came to an end. And then the chair at the time of Jami stepped down, and sort of conversations were had about whether it's something that I would consider looking at to see whether I could get involved. And a sort of aside from that, my professional, as I think Rafi, my professional career is as a barrister, and for the last 20 years that's been really dealing with personal injury and medical related cases. And I suspect it's not an exaggeration to say that 80 or 90% of my clients have some form of mental illness, whether that is a mental illness acquired as a result of an accident, a brain injury, traumatically acquired, or whether it's just mental illness brought on by circumstance or of having a significant event, an accident, a medical disaster which occurs, causing them to then maybe lose a job, relationships to break down, and the mental illness there. So it's something which I've been working with professionally and recognizing, and then something, as I say, sort of from a lay community perspective.
How's that involvement changed, both in terms of your work and Jami now, changed your view of mental health or affected your view of mental health? I'd be interested to know, because I think it's interesting. It's one of those areas that some people are very aware of and knowledgeable, have experienced themselves and know about, and others are a bit nervous about or understanding. And there's a change that I think happens as people get more aware of mental health with themselves or their family or in life. So if I can ask it quite personal, but how did it affect you?
I think the starting point, which perhaps isn't always, I mean, it might sound really obvious to say, but I'm not sure it is that we all have mental health. And we at Jami looking at some of the obviously the more serious end of mental illness, but all of us have mental health. That's just something in the same that we have physical health. We all have a level of mental health. And I suppose that the reality is there is a resilience that a number of people have, and that resilience, and I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of how that's been challenged during the pandemic. But I suspect that my perception really is just how complex an area it is. I am a campaigner, might be the wrong word, I don't know, but I'm very much of the view that we've got to view mental health in the same way that we view physical health. And perhaps that isn't something which I was so aware of before. And it's become very obvious due to the nature of the illnesses that we see at Jami, and also I see professionally, that, again, people are not now, I appreciate 30 years ago that the cancer word was a stigma, but people aren't now embarrassed by saying that they're suffering from cancer. They're not embarrassed by saying that they want help with that and support. And in the same way, that parity of esteem with mental illness, to say, I'm not embarrassed to say I'm suffering from anxiety. I'm not embarrassed to say that I have a diagnosis of schizophrenia or whatever end of the scale. So I think that what it's shown me really is just that we have to be more about that parity of esteem between mental and physical health. And I think that is improving. I think we are, there's still a lot of issues and stigma around it, but I think we are moving forward.
Absolutely. My daughters are in JFS, and they say that, it's talked about. Children will sometimes get up and talk about situations they've had to them, and it's very much respected. No one giggles at the back of the class, or in assemblies. It's very much respected and appreciated. And how would you say, in terms of the pandemic, has it affected the whole area of mental health and Jami's work?
How long we got?
Floor is yours.
I think that the pandemic has had I think people have run out of superlatives and words to describe unprecedented and the effect that it's had on the country, on the community, on the world. For me, I think in answer to that question, to start with, go back to the bigger picture. And as I say, we talked about stigma and we talked about parity of esteem. And politics aside, to see at the start of the pandemic, the Prime Minister, the Secretary of Health, standing up in Downing Street talking about mental illness and talking about the fact that they were knowledgeable and that there was a concern that the lockdown and the issues which were going to arise were going to cause problems with people's mental health, I think it is a huge shift and something that, in terms of the mental health world, in terms of future funding, in terms of the way that we look at the services that have been provided, it is a massive step forward. I mean, that wasn't, there's been tragic and big events that's happened to the country. It wasn't talked about in SARS in 2009. It wasn't really talked about after terror attacks in the same way that these things that affect the country. But all of a sudden, mental illness is something which is on a national scale. How's it affected? How's it exacerbated during the pandemic? I think that most research will show that generally, I use a generality, but generally people like structure and they like certainty in their lives. And what the pandemic has brought is exactly the opposite. There's been a lack of structure and a significant uncertainty as to what's going on, uncertainty about work, about family, about friends, about when one will be able to see each other, uncertainty about the vaccine, uncertainty about symptoms and about illness. And that obviously is something which for many, many people is new. That's not something which people will have experienced before. That uncertainty will lead in some cases to increased feelings of anxiety and stress. And certainly for those already living with mental illness or caring for somebody with mental health problems, I think that's been significantly exacerbated. And I think what we've seen is people's resilience being worn down. And I reflect a little bit, and I'm conscious of the audience and where we are sitting at the start of a new week and the end of the Jewish week. And I think that, as a community, as a Jewish community, whether you buy into every ritual, every custom or not, we have a rule book. There is an understanding. And that understanding, even in tragic times. So even when somebody passes, we know that the Lavoya will be quickly. We know that there will be a period of Shiva where the community and friends will come and comfort the mourners. We know there'll be Shloshim. We know there'll be an opportunity to go twice a day and say Kaddish, or there's an opportunity to reflect. We've got that structure. And I suppose, I'm sure your community, like other communities, in happier events, if somebody has a baby, somebody turns up with a challah on Friday afternoon or a cooked chicken, we as a community have a response. We understand what to do when things happen. March 23rd comes along, the Prime Minister says, we're going into lockdown. And nobody knows, because, I hesitate to use the unprecedented, but it's unprecedented and we don't know. And I think that is what caused a lot of people who perhaps would not think that they would suffer from their mental health would deteriorate, to wonder what's going on. And I will openly say for me, who is somebody, thank God, who's not suffered from mental illness in the past, it took me a good 2 or 3 weeks after that lockdown started to really come round to the fact that something was there, and I, had anxiety about work, about family, about seeing friends, about being out and about, and I think that, unless you're on a desert island somewhere, which I'm sure we'd all love to be at the moment, I don't think anybody really escaped that in terms of the effect on their mental health.
Yeah, no, it's true. The reassuring structures of Judaism have definitely helped along the way, but this structure has really got people, absolutely. And so, in terms of the work of Jami, how has that changed?
So the immediate thing is, we had to pivot how we operate, and for those who are not aware of sort of our structure or the way, we effectively have an offering in 4 centres in London, 4 hubs. We have a cafe in Golders Green, Headroom Cafe, which hopefully
I've been
will have been to, and a lot of programmes are run from there. Immediately, of course, we had to shut everything and close everything. And what we did, in numbers terms, we probably deal with up to 1,300 people, sort of in any one time. I'd say on our books, but within our circle, within our services, and we prioritised and looked at and identified between 200 and 300 who were with an acute need, and we pivoted the service to work out what to do. So we shut the cafe to you and I, but we used it effectively as a food kitchen so that we could prepare, and then we started serving hot meals which we would take out. And the important things were, this wasn't just kind of a delivery service. This was a delivery service, but with one of our trained members of staff, so that they would go and have a doorstep chat and start interacting, so that at least there was something there. We, on a very micro scale, we went out and bought 20 iPads and half a dozen computers, so we could give them to isolated service users who were unable to access or didn't have that technology. And then we brought in, we had some, I won't start mentioning names because it's unfair, because I'll miss somebody out, but we had some fantastic volunteers, one of whom was a guy who was in IT, who said, just set it up and set up a call, and I'll phone them and I'll talk them through and I'll work it out and I'll get everybody online. So we were able to then be able to have that sort of relationship. And we moved effectively everything online that we could. As it became apparent, because of course, we're all a bit jaded and we're all now, locked down, we know what that's about. But of course, at the time, some of us, me included, naively thought that when they said, well, it'll be 3 or 4 weeks, we thought, well, maybe it will be 3 or 4 weeks. So we didn't really, I guess, think, as soon as it became apparent that 3 or 4 weeks was maybe Jewish time and it was going to run a bit late, we then got into sort of the next stage, by which we looked at what services were able to be provided, perhaps as a walk in the park, what services we could continue to do online, who needed our daily support, our weekly support, and used our volunteer network. And the other thing we did is we invested significantly in online counselling. So we brought online 2 services, and I should say, should anybody who is watching this or know anybody or want to use it themselves, that they're fantastic services. One's called Quell, and one is called Kuth. They're effectively the same thing. Kuth is more aimed at students, Quell at adults, and they're online counselling services that you can access from your room, from your phone, and we got those going. So Kuth started on the 1st of April when for students, which was when students were still at university and it was uncertain what was going to happen, and was a way in which we could literally get into their isolated place. And then Quell came online, I think it was about June or July time, a couple of months later, so that we could reach those services. Again, I should say, if anybody does need to, then please have a look at our website, and there's links to all.
And have you had reports about how they've been used and about the effectiveness of doing support online, especially in issues of mental health?
Yes, they've been used very well. Again, I'm happy to share. The Quell contract was just over £100,000 for the year, and that gave us something like 150 hours per month of initial contact in order that people could use that one-to-one. I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, we obviously, as a charity, want to be there to support.
Right.
In the ideal world, nobody would use our services and everybody would be fine. But at the end of month one, we were already over our first month and had to top up. So
Wow.
they've been very heavily used. You know, again, I can sort of sit and those of you I know talking earlier, a few people were online, and thank you for supporting us on Thursday night at our event. And we said then we had 170% increase in young people using the services and 110% increase overall in terms of adult using the services. So they have been significantly used. I suppose the deeper answer to your question, which was, well, how, and in terms of mental health, it's not ideal. It's not ideal, although for some people, I think it's fair to say that actually being able to access mental health support from your house, from your room, from your telephone, your smartphone, and not having to go to Golders Green or to Hackney, we've got a place at Bournemouth, actually is a good thing. And one of the things that we have noticed, and is, you know, there are lessons to be learned from this, is how, in terms of that pivot of services, what can we continue to do as we come out of, please God, as we come out of the pandemic. And I suspect that a lot of the way in which we've been able to interact online, we'll be able to continue to do going forward. So although nobody would wish this on at any time in any way, we are trying to learn from how we've been put into this position and make sure we take those messages and we take the statistics and, you know, the data and look at how we plan our services going forward over, you know, the next.
No, because I was thinking that possibly, and I've had this in conversation with people, that there's a kind of intimacy that happens on your screen when you're at home that sometimes isn't the same as when you're in a room, and sometimes people are more willing to open up and share. And in fact, the fact that it's not face to face, in a way, makes it easier in some ways. It's interesting. I don't know if they found that.
Absolutely, I think that's right, and I think that. You know, it also, and I, you know, sitting where I do sort of as chair of the organisation, looking at all the different aspects, the finances, the resource, it's actually a very, we've been able to reach a lot more people, because whereas before we may have one of our occupational therapists, for example, go out and have a 10 o'clock meeting in the morning and a 2 o'clock meeting in the afternoon, we obviously look after our staff, but we've been able to, you know, have them sitting behind a screen and have a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or 12 o'clock, and so on. So we've actually managed to reach a lot more people. And it is, as you say, it's an intense, it's intimate, and you're in somebody's home, you're in somebody's, as we are, you know, as we are tonight. It's an intense experience, and I think that can be very good.
And did the therapists have to have training? It's interesting, you know, some school teachers were like, they're not sure how to teach online necessarily, but, you know, a lot of doctors jumped straight across. Did they need special training, or they felt they needed it, or they could adapt? And because they're obviously people that can communicate, they found it a natural thing to do.
I've got a tendency to answer as a lawyer, so forgive me, it's an occupational hazard. Did they need it? No. Did they have it? No, because we didn't get much warning. I was trying to think back, because I was trying to think about today and the sort of issues and topics. And you know, I remember I was looking at my diary, and I was still, beginning of March, was still sort of running around. And I remember specifically, you won't know now, but I went to have a haircut. It must have been, I think the pandemic, the lockdown started on the Monday, I think. So it must have been, I think it was a Thursday or something like that. And it was just starting, people were talking about this idea of lockdown. And it was complete. It wasn't that we knew what it was completely. Nobody really had any idea what was going to happen. So I think the answer to your question is no. Everybody just had to adapt very quickly. And I mean, I'll be honest. I was saying to some of the people who came on earlier that they certainly didn't get me for my technical knowledge. I mean, I had no
Right.
idea what Zoom was
Uh-huh.
before this, or Teams. I literally had never used it. I'd done a couple of telephone conferences at work, but this was completely new. So we just changed it. So what we also did is we stopped fundraising, and we changed our fundraising. We thought it was inappropriate at a time with so much uncertainty and where people were losing their jobs and furlough started. So we took our fundraising team and they turned into cooks and ran our events coordinator ended up running the kitchen from Golders Green. So everybody kind of pivoted. I'm told
that's very smart. No, that's great. No, a few, not all, Jewish charities have thought smartly about how to react in these situations, and it's heartening to hear that Jamie's one of those. With the vaccine coming gradually, we're in a very weird time because numbers of death is still huge, and in fact going up and stuff. And there's an overlap between two worlds. I made a parallel, obviously not the same, but at the end of the Second World War, when the camps were released, there's still a lot of people that died afterwards, and there's that in between time of like hope and a future coming, but it taking time, and at the same time us being in a terrible time. And I think that's very confusing for people as well. So how's the vaccine coming, or the long-term plan for Jami change, in terms of the next few months?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, I'll probably be, people have their views. In the autumn, in September time, we launched a strategic review. And arguably, I have to say, some people may say it wasn't the best time to launch a strategic review, but we hadn't really had one for 5 or 6 years. And
in August you did it.
Pardon?
August.
Yeah.
Good. No, good move. Good move.
And I sort of thought the reality is we don't know. Everybody kept thinking. I think there's say March time. You sort of thought, well, by Pesach it'll be fine. And then when Pesach came, you thought, well, maybe by the summer, we're back to normal summer holidays. And then of course there's a long grind as we've gone. So we are at the moment looking exactly at that as to how do we look at the services, because as you absolutely rightly point out, in terms of the sort of curve in numbers of infections and tragically the death rate is starting. I mean, I suspect it's probably another week or two people say the death rate's going up, but please God, it will start to come down, and the numbers of infections are coming down, and the tally will follow. And it's awful to talk about because there's people behind all of these numbers. Sometimes we get blinded with statistics, but I think the overarching picture as it is. I think sadly that the long tail of COVID will be the mental health, because what isn't going to change is the fact that the economy has taken a significant hit. There are areas and industries which I'm sure will recover, and I'm sure the resilience of the British people to go and do that, it will happen, but it'll be a lot slower. It won't just be, one could imagine that by the end of this year, there may be nobody in hospital with COVID, but there are still going to be industries who are fighting to get back on their feet. And that means there are going to be people who had been in work who are out of work. It means there are going to be people who had a particular way of life in a particular circumstance which will have changed. And the other side is that, again, in all of this, we quite often talk about the pandemic in the sort of in the wider and as that thing that's happening. But people are ill, and people are dying, and people haven't had an opportunity to bereave, and they haven't had an opportunity to deal with it. And I think all of that is again being almost stored up. I was very impressed on the night before the inauguration of Biden. You saw him standing outside and gave a speech in memory of the 400,000 that had died. And he said, to heal, we need to remember. And it was a very powerful moment, I think, because there hadn't been a recognition enough. And in general, I think this is such a part of the grieving process and the healing process as well.
And it was a very good thing that he did. I've been encouraging shuls to do prayer services which talk about healing and recovery, but also remembering what we've lost. I've been encouraging rabbis to do this, and there's going to be some events coming in the community coming soon, because I don't think we've been doing enough of that. And for me, it speaks to mental health, right? Not talking about these things is a terrible thing.
Undoubtedly, I think that the problem is it's been really traumatic. I mean, I managed to I say quietly blame my children from school, but I managed to contract COVID about 4 weeks ago, and it's only and unfortunately I had a pretty nasty bout of it, and it knocked me out completely. And I am somebody, you know, I sort of run at 100 miles an hour, and there's an awful lot always going on, and it affected me physically, you know, literally not being able to get up or do anything, but it also mentally, it was really difficult. It was difficult to deal, difficult to reconcile, and it was traumatic, and really scary. And I, you know, I'm thank God a lot better, or still get a little bit breathless in ways that I didn't before. I'm sure that's going to sort of go over the next few weeks. But it's the first time I think I've been looking and dealing with the pandemic and worrying about all these different things and thinking about family members and elderly relatives and everything else. And then the one thing I thought was, well, but it won't happen to me. I won't get it. Or if I do, because I'm, you know, it wasn't that long ago that UGS days, I'm sure, Rafi, but, you know, maybe in my 40s,
a few years, yes. Possibly.
And relatively, you know, keep relatively healthy. I thought, well, it won't be so bad. And it was awful. And deeply traumatic for me and dare say for my family. So I do think that we have to give ourselves time to heal, time to remember, and time to reflect on, you know, again, we mentioned earlier that in the usual course of life, Judaism's particularly good at dealing with death and passing. We're particularly good at what we have in place in terms of Shiva and in terms of that community support. And of course, for so many people, that's not been there. And I know, you know, I should say, of course, I know that shuls and the Rabbonim have been fantastic, doing whatever they can. But it's not been the same. It's not the same as having your friend come and put your arm around you and sit with you. It's just not the same. And I think we have to recognize that as we move away from, hopefully, this time of illness and death, the mental impact is going to be a much longer tail. Addressing it, absolutely. So look, in that case, look, you know, we have to come towards the end, but, you know, it's been Mental Health Awareness Shabbat. In terms of awareness for individuals and communities, what's the most important thing you want to say to us as a community, individuals, about being aware of these issues in terms of how we're acting, how we're doing? I mean, honestly, Rafi, what I want to say is thank you, because this is as good as it gets. I mean, this is the fact that you have prioritized mental health, the fact that the focus of this Shabbat, you said, yes, we will embrace that. We will embrace the idea of Mental Health Shabbat, and we won't be frightened to talk about it, and we won't worry about the stigma of talking about it. And you're very kind to have invited me. I'm sure you could have invited a lot of other very exciting psychiatrists and psychologists who have given you an equally or indeed far better insight. But the fact that you've reached out, I think is fantastic. I think that the overarching messages for any community are, first of all, challenge that stigma. We can all do that. We can all, if we hear people talking in derogatory terms about mental health or in uninformed terms about mental health, we can mental illness, we can challenge that. And I think that's really important that everybody can do. And everything else, it's not rocket science. It's doing what I'm sure we are doing, reaching out to people, talking to people, calling people, looking after your own mental health, realizing you need to have a little bit of time to deal with it yourself, realizing it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness to say, it's been a shocking week and I really am disappointed I can't go out tonight and sit in my friend's house and let them make dinner for me for a change. It's fine to feel that that's aggravating. You don't have to feel guilty about that. I think allow yourself to understand that it's okay, and really reaching out to others. I will obviously say and want to be there and offer that, of course, everything that Jami does is to try and ensure that we are supporting those who need us. And sometimes people will need a little bit of help to get in touch with us, and a little bit of support to actually open up and talk about it. So, if you do know people who would benefit from the sort of services that we have, then, of course, my message would be, please be in touch, and please don't keep it bottled in. Please do talk about it. And I know those aren't particularly wise words, but
no, they're important to say. And I'm going to open up to questions in a minute.
Words.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to open to questions in a minute. But you were reminding about not being a stigma and being understanding and forgiving of people in situations is so important. I mean, in our davening, just to remind people, when we talk about refuah, we say refuat ha-nefesh, refuat ha-guf, right? Health of the soul and health of the body, and soul always comes first. And that is about spiritual and mental health. And it's all there in our davening. We've had it, for hundreds of years, centuries, which is amazing. But, to highlight no stigma about it, you can never say that too many times. I'm glad you have. So we're going to open to questions for people. But first of all, I think Ben Tobin wanted to make an announcement before we go on to questions. So Ben, do you want to unmute?
No, let's do questions first. It's not about
that. Okay. So are there questions people would like to ask? Unmute. Yes, David?
Hi. You've both spoken about this, but when I watch the figures every day from Downing Street, the graphs, deaths, etc., I often feel that it would be quite useful to have one for mental illness in some way, domestic violence cases, or equally numbers of, anything, calls to help, because I think we're focusing so much on one aspect of it, these other aspects get forgotten. Do you agree?
Good question, Ben. Adam?
Yes. I mean, whether it's appropriate, I agree with the sentiment entirely. Whether it's appropriate in terms of the sort of briefings of doing what they're doing, I don't know. But I certainly know, again, we work in partnership across the community, and you talk about domestic violence, and JWA would tell you that, I don't know what their exact statistics, but they would tell you of a significant increase in their work. And whether the statistics needs to be there or not, I don't know, but I think the sentiment is there. And as I say, to be fair, I think, the government has, in those briefings, recognised the issues of mental health. And yes, from my perspective as chair of a mental health charity, I'm always going to say any way in which it can be put out there so people can be familiar, understand, and hopefully reach out if they have problems, then I would absolutely support.
Ben, you asked a question? Have you got the hand as well? Yes.
It's me, actually.
Okay.
It's not directly related to COVID, but I was just interested. My main concern with mental health is about the stigma that's involved with people saying that they have a mental illness. And I would guess, although I don't know, so please correct me, that Jami is so busy dealing with what's in front of them, with the people who have problems and coping with them and helping them. I was wondering how much they do in terms of opening people's eyes generally to the stigma that surrounds mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can answer that directly. We try to do both. I think that it's absolutely right. In terms of the last 10, 11 months, we have been very much focused on dealing with a kind of, certainly what was an emergency response and now is a slightly more tapered and pragmatic response. But certainly in looking at our strategy, we call it transforming the landscape, which is a very nice phrase. But what it basically means is making it open, making the discussion about mental health open to be there. I think as Rafa mentioned earlier, in JFS and indeed in all the large Jewish secondary schools, there are mental health professionals who are working with the teachers and the schools on that level. And what we try to do and what we've created, I mean, again, it's been very difficult during the pandemic, but with a cafe, for example, in Golders Green, we've just acquired a site in Mill Hill, in my local community, and we're looking at where we can acquire further sites, is to normalize it. So if you go, and I hope others have been to the Cafe in Golders Green, it doesn't scream out as this is a mental illness haven. It screams out this is a place where people can go, but we are welcoming, and there is the opportunity. It's a safe space where people can talk about their mental health.
It's a cool place with great quiche.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You joke aside. I mean, obviously, it's very important for Jews that the food's good, but that is an important part. We did not want it to be a plastic cup sort of the sort of thing you find in in a hospital canteen type thing, where we wanted it to be a proper offering, so that it was normal, because it is normal, and it's normal to go in, and in the same way that it might be normal to go into Starbucks or somewhere and have a coffee and talk about your bad knee or your hip replacement or, God forbid, your cancer or whatever it is. It's normal to go into the headroom and talk about your mental health.
Yeah, I think it was genius calling it headroom as well, in terms of what that says about headroom, giving space for our heads and everything. So,
but it's certainly, I will I accept it may not have been top of our agenda for the last 12 months. It will absolutely be very much at the top end of our agenda in terms of our strategic review going forward, because you're absolutely right. It is vital that people continue to talk about it, and we continue to break down the stigma.
Are there other questions people have for Adam?
Yeah, I've got a question, which is, I think that the Jewish community, we have many plus points, but I think complacency and smugness is part of our framework, if you like, not framework, but
okay, Martin. Okay,
I have the impression, and also based on some personal experience, that we are very insensitive towards people who are on their own or who are slightly odd, slightly different. This can extend, let's say, a shul kiddush, someone who isn't part of a large family group, who isn't the flavor of the month, they're on their own. I've had comments made, well, I feel very self-conscious being on my own on Friday night. If you're walking on Golders Green, Hendon, on a Shabbat, everyone's in a group. If you're not part of a group, you, how can we break that down? How can we deal with that?
I think it is a fair analysis, and I think it's absolutely vital. This time last year, I spoke at another shul, Mental Health Shabbat, and talked exactly about that, about what does it mean to be part of a community, and what is normal, and is the person, because a community should welcome everybody, and why am I the normal person sitting in my seat as opposed to the person who's sitting at the back looking a bit strange, a bit different as to what might think. I think there are very simple ways of actually addressing that. And again, I know in my shul, Mill Hill United, we have specific, on a Shabbos morning, I mean, we've not been there for so long, but we did have, there would be people in both the men's and the women's section who are there as a sort of meet and greet and to introduce people and to sit and talk to people. And there was that openness to say as a community that we embrace everybody and we talk to everybody. I think there's ways in which, as a shul, specifically within that shul service and the setting, it can be done, introducing people, calling people up, making it very clear that it's quite okay to be different and to embrace difference. And Laurie Rackline, who's our fantastic CEO, tells a story of somebody saying that there's a woman running down Golders Green Road with a tin hat on, and everybody avoided her, thinking, this is some crazy mad woman. And she eventually came into Headroom, to the cafe, and Laurie, being Laurie, said to her, "Well, why are you wearing a tin hat?" And she said, "Well, I'm worried something's going to fall on my head." Well, I can tell you, in my 20 years of practice as a personal injury lawyer, I've had dozens of clients who have been injured because they've been walking down the street past a building site and things have fallen on their head. So who's the crazy person? The person who's walking down the street with a tin hat on, or me who's not walking with a tin hat on, So I think that it's the way that you have to look at people and the way you look at life. I think we have to be more open. But I think communities can do that in the way and try to be, as inclusive as possible. And it's not easy. And of course, there are those who don't want to necessarily engage. And sorry, I don't want to too long, but I think what's been really interesting is in this virtual world where, again, a lot of communities have had, I'm sure you have as well, this Havdalah, and have had sort of other services during the week or a pre-Shabbat service. And of course, what Zoom allows you to do is actually join in. You don't have to turn your video on, you don't have to turn your sound on, you can just sit and watch and feel as a part of that community, which is something you can't really do in shul. You can't, I suppose you can hide, in the corner or hide under your tallit or a big coat. But Zoom's actually allowed that. So again, it's interesting to see we've been able to reach out a bit further as to how we can do that. And I think the point of that being, when we do come out of lockdown, when we do come out of the pandemic, we should try and do it together, not just those, but we should try and do it with those who are isolating, so that this, which I think, it's been lovely to talk to you, these sort of events should still happen, and they shouldn't necessarily happen back in your synagogue. They should happen like this, so that a wider group of people can get involved, and those who are isolated, who wouldn't turn up to a shul service because they don't want to go into a room, because they have anxiety going into that room, can still participate and take part. There's a small example, but I just think we need to think about how we do that as we, please God, as I say, move out of the pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. Very sensible, very useful, very helpful to hear about the work of Jami. Obviously, we salute what Jami is doing and appreciate and value it. We hope that it gets well funded and supported, and that your strategic review leads to good new directions. And your messages to us about the importance of, for us as a community, being aware of this and not letting it be a stigma and reaching out to people is well taken. And we wish Hatzlacha for you personally, that you should breathe in and out helpfully and healthily. I've had issues as well, and we should all look after each other and be forgiving, and always ask how you're doing, and just give space for people to talk and so on. Absolutely. Thank you so much, really.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And as I say, thanks for dealing with mental health and just having mental health Shabbat within your communities.
Yeah, I know, it's vital. And we salute by Daniel Epstein, who helped encourage this to happen. Absolutely. He's a good friend of mine. Absolutely.
Yeah, he was very much behind it. Yeah.
And Ben, did you want to make your announcement quickly? And then I've got things to say as well at the end. Go on.
Firstly, to thank Adam. I think it was an amazing session. Thank you very much. Just to say that on Monday night, we've got our penultimate session with Marcus Freed. We've had a really good session of, don't know what you call them. They're not exactly lectures or shiurim. They've been very participatory in the way that we've discussed now, with people able to join in as much as they want. 8 o'clock on Monday night. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's appreciated. And I just want to say, it's funny. I was going to actually mention that as well. One aspect, Ben. So if you could just mute somebody, because we've got a bit of back noise. Just a couple more things I wanted to mention about Marcus as well. And I don't normally talk about NSGS events, but I think because it's been Mental Health Awareness Shabbat, I wanted to mention it. That Marcus, as well as as being a great teacher and a big lover of Sachs's ideas and explaining them, is actually a very good yoga and meditation teacher. And we've organized through LSJS that actually he's going to be doing a course starting in February about that. And the reason as well it's good is, as Adam has said, you can do it with your screen off or on in the comfort of your home. And that's definitely healthy for all of us to do, and especially in the current climate, it's a really good thing to do. So Marcus, I can see you there. Really glad you're doing that. Thank you so much for doing that for us. Also to thank Edward for organizing this for us, and we wish him all well. And to say what's on next week, Dr. Miri Freud Kandel, who is a great historian of Anglo Jewry and of Jewish ideas. And she's written books about Chief Rabbi Hertz, and she's working on Jakovovitz, and she knows a lot about politics. And we have great chats about the reality of politics and leadership in our community, and about the theory and the vision of what these people stand for. And she's a real expert on what these people stand for. And me, as a Jewish educator, I love talking to her about it, also because she's my cousin as well. So I love her for that as well. So Miri is really interesting. You'll really enjoy it next week as well. Hope you can see you all then. Thanks again to Adam. Hatzlacha with Jami. Be aware of it. Go visit Headroom when you can. Thanks for Marcus for the learning and for what he's going to be doing in the future. And I wish you all a Shavua Tov and health and all good things. Be well, Shavua Tov.
Thanks, Rafi.
Thanks.
Thank you, Shavua.